Welcome everybody back to the Ohio Business Spotlight. Today, this episode is brought to you by Follow to Lead Executive Coaching. Mr. Tony Miltenberger is the man when it comes to your needs. If you operate a business, it doesn't matter what size, he has information, he has some hacks, he has some advice where he has taken leaders of multi-million dollar companies and made them more efficient, more profitable, and he's helped them figure out some systems. So for all of your executive coaching needs, I want to turn you directly to Follow to Lead Executive Coaching, Mr. Tony Miltenberger. I'll say this a couple times, make sure before we get started that you hop on and like and subscribe to Tony's Follow to Lead YouTube channel. That is where you will find all of our Ohio business spotlights. And I'm excited that we have Mr. Bob Lozan on today. I've gotten to know Bob through my son. My son is a business owner, and he was a previous guest on our podcast. And we know the questions that business owners want answered. We know we've learned that there's ways our guests can help business owners that watch this right here. They can stop them from bumping their head, and they can help them not have to recreate a process from some of the things that our guests have done. So I want to tell you a little bit about Bob. Bob is the president of One Stop Auto Detailer Supply Company, a premier automotive reconditioning and detailing supply business based in Beaver Creek, Ohio. Serving the greater Dayton area since 1975, the company has built a reputation as the go-to source for auto dealerships and professional detailers, stocking over 700 specialized products from waxes and dressings to heavy-duty acids and soaps, all available without costly shipping charges. Bob, welcome to our podcast today.
Greg, nice to be here today, and I appreciate you having me on.
Well, so here's one of the things that our listeners are going to automatically pick up on, right? They're going to go, man, this business has been there since 1975. I'm going to assume that there has been some succession planning that you guys have executed in your business for you to be sitting here today. Is this a family-run operation? And if so, kind of take us through what the timeline looked like and how did you land in that seat right now?
Okay, great. Absolutely. My dad started in 1975 in the Dayton area. Started with a company and built a successful following throughout the dealership world and other industries. And in 99, decided to open his own. And through that, at the time I was working for GM. He had tried a couple other people to come work for him, and one day he calls me into his office and he says, I need you. You want to come to work for me? And it was one of those pivotal moments in your life when you've got an opportunity. And I said without hesitation, before he finished a question, I think I said yes. I grew up around this, and I've always wanted to jump into the field. And so when I understood why I had a young family, and he tried to, GM, great job, great benefits. But as soon as he gave me that opportunity, I said yes. And it's funny, just a little side note. I went home and told my wife, I said, I'm going to work for my dad. Again, we had 2 young children at the time. And she said, well, no one quits GM. And I said, well, you go to work there. I hate it. So I'm going to go to work for my dad.
It's funny.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I said, no, I'm from Flint, Michigan, where General Motors was born, and everybody works for General Motors up in Flint. Everybody works either for a supplier, or at least it was the case in the past before General Motors made the big shift down to Detroit. But both my great grandfathers moved to the Flint area in 1919 to work for Buick from northern Michigan. And you're right. When I got out of the military, that's what you do. I went and put in my application at General Motors, and I'm happy that they never I'm happy that they never reached back to me,
Never got
or
the
at least
call.
they didn't in a timely fashion because I found something else. So you're unique. You're not unique in the sense that we've had some family-owned businesses, and I always love hearing those stories. But your business story is unique, as you're primarily business to business. And we don't get a lot of that here on the podcast. So I'm kind of excited today because I know that some of our viewers have asked us to have some business to business owners on because the struggle is different. It's the same, but it's different. Can you talk to me a little bit about, and I want to get more of your history. I didn't mean to interrupt that, but
Oh no, you're
I
good.
know that this is one of the things that people have sent me messages about the most, saying, will you please get a business to business owner on there and talk about some of those struggles? So if you can mix in your answer and if you can dive back in your history, I'm totally cool with that. Let me hear what you got.
Yeah, I think relationships in a business to business model, just like if you're dealing direct to the customer or the general public, a business to business is an ongoing relationship, but relationships are paramount in this situation. Um, you know, we, I came in, again, going back to that, I came in October 1st, 2000 was my first day with my company, with my dad. And in the car business, much like probably a lot of other businesses, industries, I was a nobody, young kid walking in, and I had to earn their respect. But over the last, 2.5 decades, again, October 1st this year, I will have finished my 26th year. What you learn is once you have those relationships, once you've proven yourself to those people, to those customers, they take you wherever they go with you, or with them. I'm sorry. Um, you know, there's job hopping like in any industry, but if someone is managing over here and then they hop over here to another dealership, another, whatever, they're taking me with them. They want, because I've proven to them over 25, 26 years that the job that we do makes it so much easier on them and makes their job much easier also.
So your dad kind of built all these relationships, and you had to kind of come in and I'm going to be cliche here, but kind of fill his shoes. Those relationships. What was it like, kind of, them seeing the sun come in, and what did you feel like you had to do? I love how you said that relationships make everything, because that just isn't a business to business thing. You said that right off the bat, but relationships really are. I think a lot of business owners, the successful business owners that we've had on our podcast, that's one of the very first things that they've said. So you're stepping in, you're filling these shoes right here. What was that like? What type of challenges did you face doing that right there?
Well, that's a great question. And I'll tell you one little bit of history. My grandfather actually started in the car business in the 40s in Dayton. So if you when you introduce me as Bob Lozan, I'm actually Robert George Lozan the third. So I'm Bob Lozan the third. And each there's still a few old hats in the business that do remember my grandfather also. So he was in the car business. We are an ancillary business to the car business. We are a vendor, but since my dad had been doing it so long, it is intimidating a little bit. We ran separate trucks for years, and then in 19 he stepped down and retired, and I took over everything. So, sorry to speak about that. I have a truck, kind of like a Snap-on truck, and we do route sales. That's our business model. Um, I was uh, I was intimidated a little bit. Now I had been doing this for 19 years with my customers, but to come in, some people my dad had known for 30 plus years, it's really, really tough. I mean, really 40 years. It's really, really tough because I think everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. And mine and my dad's are completely different, even though we're in the same business and father and son. Um, I, I, I tend to I tend to work very well with the what I call the back of the house in a dealership, detailers, service departments, body shops. My dad did is much better up front where the managers, the sales managers, things are promotionals, um, and those type of items. So getting someone, kind of finding out what their needs were and what their expectations were, it was a little intimidating at first, but I've held on to I mean, everybody that we had, I haven't lost that I know of a customer since my dad retired. Um, and I feel pretty good about, where that went, how that transition went.
Well, let's bust a myth here, okay? I
Okay.
know the show isn't called Mythbusters, but we're going to bust a myth right here. I'm going to tell you what a lot of people think, and then you're going to bust the myth, okay? So that's how we're going to
Okay.
play the
Sure.
game.
Sure.
Man, Bob, you took over a business that has been going in some form or fashion since the 1970s. Your dad worked in it and you stepped in and it's still going. Man, you had it so easy. Everything fell into line. Nothing could have went wrong with what you guys had going on. Bust that myth.
Absolutely. So the first part of that myth was I had it so easy that um, when I started until my dad retired, I was straight commission. There was nothing given at all. If I sold $1 that day, I was going to make a commission off that. So everything that I my paycheck, I earned every penny of it. My dad's, or when I came in, my dad had never been to the customer base that I was coming into. So I had to build that. I did, they had known someone from the other company, the previous company that my dad worked for, but they didn't know One Stop and they didn't know me. And so I had to establish that customer base. So there's one part of that myth busted. The second part is that if you've been around the Dayton area, let's say I'm 53. I'll date myself here. I'm 53 years old. The Dayton market and the automotive market in the Dayton region has changed dramatically. From you go back to '08, where we lost all those dealerships, where GM shut down and GM as a company, shuttered brands, and we had single point stores. And what I mean by that is we had Oldsmobile stores. Well, Oldsmobile's no longer in business,
Right.
and the thing that we're dealing with now are uh, basically corporation style detail or dealerships, from out of the area that don't know One Stop as a supplier.
Okay.
We have to make, or we have to somehow foster a relationship with that and start from the ground. So it's really been a tough environment.
So, talk to me about. I think that there's things as a business owner specifically, and I'm going to ask you to be specific here if you're able.
Yeah.
And one example is fine, but if you have multiple, there's always that something. When I used to do some very, very low level business consulting, not what Tony does, and I always found I always the solution or the problem that they encountered was something that they did not see coming. Something jumped out of the bushes at them that they were blindsided by. And to be candid with you, some of them folded up and closed the doors because they could not problem solve. They could not figure out a strategy. And I'm interested because we hear various stories. Some of them I've literally been, whoa. But what's jumped out of the bushes at One Stop and at Bob that, man, just made you go, I did not see that coming?
Well, I think there's a couple things to there's a couple things probably in my career that, and it's not necessarily one that I didn't see coming, but how much it affected our business was. And I know we're sitting in 2026, and this sounds funny to say this, but the internet. So when I first started, here's a great example to that is when I first started, probably 60% of our business was what I call dealer supply, which means anything from legal paperwork to key tags and all that stuff that the business needs, but also promotionals. You see the license plates, the license plate frames, stickers,
Oh,
all that
okay.
stuff.
Okay.
That stuff, people couldn't get that anywhere but when we came around.
Wow.
And probably 40% of our business was chemical. It's now 80/20. Chemical is 80% of our business. 20% of it is what I call dealer supply. I think that has really, and we had to pivot very strongly. And so I guess I feel very blessed at the strength of what, when we were talking about strengths and weaknesses earlier, my strength is the back of the house. That's where 80% of our business is right now.
Mhm.
And here's a huge example. We used to put on wheel covers, right? Your car had a steel wheel and you put on wheel covers. GM made everything with steel wheels unless you took top of the line and it had a chrome or whatever type of wheel on it. Well, we would have wheel covers. When I first started, we were putting on somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 sets a week. I haven't put on a set of wheel covers in 3 years. So, you have to pivot there a little bit. I think the second thing that I have a hard time still to this day to see coming is the acquisitions. People, you hear a lot of rumors in business and such. Oh, so and so's for sale. This dealership group is going to buy this, whatever. Um, but all of a sudden, you'll leave a place one week and you're going back in 2 weeks, and you come back and, oh, this group bought this dealership, and that is still something that can come out of left field, and hit you really hard. So
Now, you talk about pivoting, and it's funny. You're the first person to bring up the internet, although I'm certain our previous 60-ish guests have had to deal with it. I've got a guest coming up here in 2 or 3 weeks that runs Shop Smitten, and she runs a ladies' boutique
oh yeah.
retail clothing operation. And I'm always amazed. I remember asking her when she moved her location from Oakwood to Centerville. And I
Hmm.
remember asking her, and I'm anxious to revisit this with her on the podcast. Leslie, how do you compete with Amazon and all of these retailers that people don't have to go into a brick and mortar? They don't have to open up a door. They don't have to leave their couch or their recliner or their desk. And they can just conveniently click and shop and get it sent to them in a day, and they can even return it efficiently. You're the first person to bring up the internet impact, even though all of our listeners are going to go, we have a relatively young audience, are going to go, wait a minute, was there a day when the internet didn't exist, so you're the first person to bring that up, and I'm fascinated by that pivot. You talked about some of your promotional products. Did you find that the internet became the competitor for those and where that's tailed off? Or did you want to pivot to the chemical side because you felt like there was more margin, or you had better relationships, or it was more sustainable?
Well, it's funny because there's an interesting dynamic in the auto industry, in the dealership world. Sometimes the guys that I'm dealing with in the back, what I call the back of the house, sometimes the service manager's over them, sometimes the parts manager, most of the time the sales managers are over them. So I'm much more familiar with the people I'm dealing with every single week in those areas, and every once in a while have to venture to whether it's the front of the house or whatever. And I don't want to sound like I'm never in those areas, but I am. I will say this, that pivoting to chemical over promotionals was natural to me because I think I've always loved cars. Like I said, my whole family was in the car business one way or another. And so taking care of that, seeing the finished product, I'm a detail oriented person generally on most things. Um, I like to see a finished product, and so I gravitated towards that naturally.
Anyway, we were talking about the internet, and I think I had asked you the business segment, the way that your not sales model, but your product mix shifted.
Right.
Do you consider that internet related, or was that a strategic move on your part? What do you attribute that to?
Well, I will say that the internet had a lot to do with that, but when we talked about where the strengths and weaknesses were, of me and my dad, I had grown up around the car business, so I'd always loved cars, loved taking care of them. My I loved my Mustang GT 5.0 that I had when I was in high school, and
All right.
and so I loved all that, and so my natural I gravitate naturally to someone that's doing that job. And it's easy for me because, a sales tactic of mine, it's not really a tactic, it's just common sense is, hey, find some common ground, right? Find some common ground with your customer and then build on that, build the relationship on that. And so when someone's doing that job, and I've taught myself over the years, been to tons of training, trained hundreds of people in the industry, um, my naturally gravitate towards detail chemical because I know it so well, and I can sell what I believe in.
So you kind of segued into the next place. It's really what brought us here. We had about six, we called the episode The Young Guns, and we had six young business owners on. We had a landscaper, we had a plumber, we had a pressure washer, we had an auto detailer. Logan was on, and I have all of them as clients. But it's so cool for me because I find myself mentoring them because they want to know, hey, should I hire this employee 1099 or should I hire him W-2?
Hmm.
Should I pay cash for this piece of equipment or should I, finance it? And that's a big question. And that's what put you on my radar because my son Logan owns the Lone Detailer, and he does auto detailing, and he's very anxious to get information, and he's always talking about. In fact, before you and I went live on the podcast, you were telling me about one gentleman that you were kind of mentoring, but there has to be many more. What do you hear in that space where what questions come to you that entrepreneurs, they don't have to be young entrepreneurs, but what questions are young or are entrepreneurs bringing to you that you kind of through your experience and your training have learned and you're able to help them solve?
So a couple different things. We got on the internet. We got on the internet conversation just a second ago, and it's funny because I tell everybody, stay off YouTube to learn about detailing because it's not reality. They get on there and they see, oh, well, I just pulled in this Lamborghini and I'm going to do this for $1,200, $1,500 and I'll call it a day. No, that's not reality in the detail world. So when guys come and talk to me, a lot of their questions are about customer acquisition. And again, going back to one of my opening remarks was, those are relationships you have to build. I've known we'll use Logan since you brought him up, Greg, and I've known Logan now probably for 5 or 6 years, and you have to be patient. You have to give that good service, but you have to be patient because then that comes, and then your name gets out there. And a lot of these, jump on YouTube and find how to make $1 million your first year in business is not reality. And so I think that's the number one question I get is about customer acquisition. Secondly, I try to tell everybody, look, we are very old school at what we do. we still are the business model where I walk in the door the same time every week or every 2 weeks to my customer. And, and I get to know them and I talk to them and I ask them what they need. And, and, so it's not a, hey, quick, here, what do you need? Let me take your order. And I think that this business world, especially maybe in the Dayton area, is coming back around to that a little bit. That they want, there's a Dorothy Lane Market, there's a Kroger, there's an Aldi. All of those serve a purpose. I want to be the Dorothy Lane Market. Okay, I want to specialize in customer satisfaction. Chick-fil-A is successful because they have almost too many employees, right? And I want to take care of my customers. And if you do that, if you mix those two, if you build the relationship and take care of your customer, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be successful.
You ever seen that meme on social media? It says, I trust Chick-fil-A so much that even when they get my order wrong, they know what's good for me. um, you talk about elementary stuff, and it's all entry level. It's all, you still there?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, gotcha. You talk about entry level stuff like 101, business 101. And I love that because whenever I've worked with an entrepreneur before, when I used to do it in the business consulting world, I flew out to the West Coast one time and I was consulting. A gentleman paid me a lot of money to fly out there. And I was observing his office for about 2 hours. And I went to the front door and I flipped the close sign. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, we're going to split this up. I'm going to work with you. You're going to run the sweeper. I'm going to clean the glass. She's going to empty the trash. And you're going to wipe all this stuff down. And he said, I didn't pay you $5,000 to come out here and provide janitorial services. And I said, if your customer walks in here, it looked like some kid had just blew his nose all over the front door.
Right.
And your floor, this floor hasn't been swept in a week, and the trash is overflowing. You're sending a message to your customer that you're not worth any more than that. I don't need to impress you. And it's always the entry level stuff. And that's why I loved your approach, relationships, being there at the same time, not just taking the order, but getting to know the people. All of those things right there are just, and I think a lot of people hear that advice from you and I and the other business owners that have been on our podcast. And I think people sometimes go, it can't be that easy. And it was about one other thing you mentioned about having patience. Take care of your customers at the level that Dorothy Lane Market does and that Chick-fil-A does. And that word will get around. It does require some patience, but I think a lot of, I deal with some landscapers right now that they do such good work. They have more business than they could deal with if the year was still 12 more months long.
Right.
They have, because they do that thing. And I love that you hyped just entry level business, because everybody thinks I got to have a special marketing plan and I've got to have this fancy thing on the internet or on social media. And you hit the nail square when you said, man, just take care of people, be on time, and get to know your customers. And that approach right there, that never fades. It really doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't build a skyscraper without a good foundation,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
You can't. You got to set the cornerstone, right? We got to set a cornerstone and we got to build from there. And if you can't get the basics right, a good marketing plan from someone that doesn't know your demographics, it doesn't do anything for you. So I really do feel like if you master, and that's in a lot in life, not just business, but if you master the basics, everything else can be built off of that. And I know that sounds elementary sometimes, and it sounds remedial, but it really is true. And I think we've gotten away from that in society. With the Amazon, you brought that up earlier, and how do we compete with that? We compete because people still desire that relationship, whether it's that business relationship that I feel important, I feel heard, I feel taken care of, I'm in on that. And I know with that model, I'm not going to be everybody's vendor, and I'm okay with that. But I'm still, if you look around the Dayton and or surrounding area, we still have the majority of the dealerships, and they value that.
Well, I listen to Ryan Hawk's Learning Leader podcast each week, and I was really lucky. Tony and I were lucky to have Ryan on our show. He runs, whether you listen to Apple Podcast or Spotify, he has the #1 or #2 business podcast in the world.
Mhm.
And he's from Centerville, so we were really lucky to have him on our show. But he was talking in the episode yesterday, and he was talking about his guest was someone who really did a deep dive into artificial intelligence. And he said there's a place for artificial intelligence. There's even podcasts where it's nothing but an artificial intelligence personality interviewing an artificial intelligence guest. And he actually had somebody in one of his inner circles come up and say, man, this artificial intelligence podcast could put you out of business. And he said, no, 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 no. I don't ever worry about that, because people want to hear experiences. They want to know something about you. They want to know they want to know that it hasn't been easy all the time, that you've had to struggle through some of the stuff that you had to struggle through. They want that story right there. And that just jumped to the front of my mind when you said that right there.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I've tried to think. One of my close friends is a software developer and in software sales, and he's been on AI for a long time, and he uses it a ton. He's like, what could we do? How could we, and I'm sure that could benefit my business somehow, whether it's, make me more efficient, whatever, profitable. At the end of the day, if I don't have that relationship with my customer, I could have all the AI, all the gadgets, all the everything running in the background, and I wouldn't have a customer base. So I still have to master all of that before I can, go on again and to play with that or whatever. And I have sat down with him, and we've had some discussions about, what does it look like to, integrate AI into my business? And a lot of that probably is going to come into there. I've got some things in the future coming for education. I want to do some education locally, and maybe and maybe hit that out a little, maybe nationally or whatever, or maybe worldwide, whatever. Only because I feel like everything that I see, and we talked about this, I mentioned this for a minute, the YouTube detail experience is really not, I can tell you this. If Logan goes out and does a car and he says, man, Bob, he goes, that was really, really bad car. I know it was a really bad car because he's done that, you know. And so we've talked about, integrating some of that into my business. I just right now where it's at, there's not a whole lot of that I could, really get into. And so I don't fear it, because my business could never be taken from that, or by that.
Right.
But I do want to use it if I can use it.
Yeah, there's on that Young Guns episode, I know I keep going back to that, but I just think of the mentorship that you're providing to some business owners. And one of the plumber from Swish Plumbing just said, I never got to worry about AI taking over what I do, because no AI is going to come and unstop somebody's toilet.
Exactly. Exactly.
So we love breaking news on this podcast right here. And whether you realize it or not, you kind of hinted to some breaking news that there might be something in the future. So I'm going to tie that theme to, I don't have the special breaking news soundbite like they have on Fox News or
Yes.
something, but
Yes.
I want to tie that to something. I'm going to refer to Ryan Hawk again, because he talks about this moment each podcast. He says, all right, 1 year from now, you and I are going to be celebrating your team, your family, and let's say I'm invited, and we're popping tops on bottles of champagne or whatever it is that you want. 1 year from now, what are we going to be celebrating, Bob?
Well, I think, okay, so I thought about that actually today, believe it or not, and not in anticipation that you would ask that question, but I'm a numbers guy. I go out every week, and if you're in a sales job, whether it's weekly, monthly, yearly, whatever, you keep track of your numbers. And right now, the last couple years have been pretty good. I've worked pretty hard, and I've went up over a little over 6% each of the last 2 years. So I felt really well, good about that. Um, right now I'm tracking just a little bit above 25. So I need to pick it up a little bit. But what I'm really excited about here in the next year is my dad and I's best year together. I'm going to be maybe 20% off of that by myself. And so I really want to push that to that. And I do have some great ideas. I said the education, but I want to mix in really I want to try to really focus. We used to have a lot of walk-in business, what we call a storefront business. And I really want to amp that back up to where people are coming in. So we're in some development stages of maybe getting some, because if Greg Fay comes in and I try to sell you a gallon of something, you're like, yeah, Bob, it'll take me 3 years to use a gallon of this.
Right.
So we're really trying to focus on maybe some more user friendly. I don't know if if going to Meyer as an example, Meyer's a mile from my house right here in Kettering. And if you go into the automotive section, you see how much shelf space the detail chemical industry has gotten. And just to give you a number, Greg, last year, the detail chemical business was a 12.5 billion in 1 year worldwide chemical business. And you see the shelf space growing, whether you go into an O'Reilly's or an Advanced or an AutoZone or whatever, those shelves, auto chemicals are growing. So I want to try to capture some of that and get my storefront business back. We, like I said, we used to do a lot, walk in, and we don't do as much anymore. I think with all how easily they can get it over, from online. But I do want to focus on that, and I think that'll get my number back to where me and my dad were doing by together. I think I can accomplish almost that by myself.
Wow.
So that's my goal.
So business owners, when they're in it for 26 years, don't just sit back and count the register receipts and go on vacation. Successful business owners continue to take that trajectory up, and I love that right there. Well, this has been so cool right here, Bob. I want to have you back on when you start to put together that education platform.
Okay.
I'd love if you'd reach back out to me and let me know when you're comfortable where it's at a point, because I have a feeling that would be something that our audience, Tony and I's audience, would gobble up right here. I'd love it if you did that. One thing I didn't forewarn you is I'm setting you up for the hardest question that there is that I asked all thing, and
Okay.
Tony always asks this question right here, and I usually try to prep someone for it ahead of time, but I didn't today. This podcast right here has only survived some 60 plus episodes from our guests telling us another business or two that we should have on as a guest. And if you have any one or two, and I know everybody says, boy, I don't want to forget anybody. So, if you have to send them to me or whatever, but if you can think of one or two that we should invite, do any come right off the mind? Because we would love to reach out to them. That's the lifeblood of our podcast.
Well, it is interesting. I have, what we call vendors in the car industry. Different guys go into dealerships for different reasons. So if you said, hey, Bob, what's the name of somebody, I have guys that run, as an example, dent businesses, and they travel around and they fix dents. I know that sounds like, but it's very similar to what I do. But we have, what I call paint and scratch, guys,
Yeah,
and
sure.
they do big businesses,
Mhm.
Matter of fact, I do have, yeah, I do have a company that would be a great guest for you. It's two owners. When I met the one owner, he just started in the business as an apprentice, and I met the other owner, was a lot tech at a car dealership, and they merged, learned the business together, and now they're probably, well, they are the biggest business in the Dayton and surrounding area for that.
Nice.
And I would gladly send you that. That would be a great team to have on.
Great. Well, I'd be thankful for it when I send you a copy of the podcast. You can reply with that. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. You're a business owner that is trying to keep his trajectory going up. I know that that doesn't leave a lot of free time. You and I talked about your family before you got on here. I know that they take up a big spot in your calendar. So my audience and I, and I'll speak on behalf of Tony, I'm so thankful that you took the time to spend with us today.
Greg, I appreciate it. And one more thing I want to say
Yeah.
to you is these platforms are extremely important that you're doing and having people on, because I think the wave of the future is, whether, you said the plumber from Swoosh, you're working with your hands, but an entrepreneurial spirit in this young generation. I think we're going to be very surprised. They get a bad rap a lot of times about not working, and I see a lot of young guys that want to go out there and make their business work. So I appreciate what you do, and and we'll be in touch. Okay.
Fantastic. Well, everybody, please make sure that, again, you hit that subscribe button on Follow to Lead. On behalf of my partner, Tony Miltenberger, and I, we are so happy that you guys were an audience for us today. We'll see everybody next week on the Ohio Business Podcast.